Well, again, here we are dealing with another massive topic of Mao Zedong's era as ruler of China. Again, I'm desperately trying to keep these quick and short and to the point while still explaining things to you. Please, please, please feel free to play these at double speed. Watch them a couple of times. Remember, in this item, you're doing an ISI. You don't have to study all of the content in great detail here. You'll pick up on some elements. You'll get an overview, a feeling of the main trends and ideas. Certainly throw some ideas down in notes as you go along. Do not feel that you need to be expert in every element of content to do the ISI. You may even have chosen different aspects of it. But let's get stuck into the Great Leap Forward and the Great Famine. And remember, play me double speed if you like. Okay, let's do this. Here are the main characteristics of the Great Leap Forward, 58 to 62, and I'm putting with it the Great Famine of 59 to 61 because they're so interconnected. But everything's interconnected. Our previous era of land reform connects in here. The sense of fear in China that you can't tell the truth that emerged out of the anti-rightist campaign at the end of the 100 Flowers campaign, that's all connected in here. So look, think about how everything connects and get an overview feeling of what we're going to say. You'll see the lumps of ideas come up a lot bigger in this space, but I did want to give you notes and I did want you to think it through. So here's the first two related ideas. Looking at the dark blue, land reform had reached this new stage by 1958. There'd been a radical transformation in the countryside, and this then led to a radical attempt to transform industry across China. Land reforms and changes and nationalisation of industries in the cities and towns were all part of this first 5-year plan. Increasingly by 1958 or so, all rural private ownership, even if you had like a small small plot of land and a small flock of chickens and a couple of pigs and so on, all that private land ownership of even in some cases the village hut you might have had are being abolished. Money and wages even are gone in the countryside. This, from our Western point of view in Australia, is almost unthinkable. Money is being replaced by a point system. If you worked hard doing a difficult job, if you put in extra hours, you got extra points. If you got extra points, you got extra rations, you got extra privileges and so on. And this was open to so much corruption and mismanagement by Communist Party cadres in the villages. They were monitoring it and they were also manipulating it to their own ends. The communes that are being built instead of villages are now a barracks-style way of operating. Villages aren't the traditional villages in many areas. What they actually are more military camps. There's a sense that if you could only somehow turn the peasantry into the Red Army, you would achieve so much more, because the Red Army had this revolutionary enthusiasm that carried them forward against all odds. So there was women's barracks and men's barracks. It meant couples were being broken up, kids didn't see their parents and so on. Now, all of this was connected to the idea that if you could industrialize China, if you could release this revolutionary enthusiasm, then China could overtake the British Empire, well, actually United Kingdom, Britain, Great Britain, overtake its industrial output in just 15 years. Now, what they're really saying here is they're going to overtake the steel and coal and engineering output of Britain that it took Britain a couple of 100 years to establish. They're going to overtake that from a peasant economy in 15 years. That's the speed of change they're looking at doing. It's a very, very ambitious, to say the least, goal. Some might even say unrealistic. How are they going to do this? They're going to get all of the food that is being produced in the countryside, and they're going to use that as the supplies for the cities and towns. Everything the countryside could produce would go to the cities and towns so they could improve their industrial output. Grain and steel production, therefore, are the focus of the Chinese government. They're the priority. What they're trying to emulate is this sense of heroic Red Army achievement that took place in the myth of the Long March and create a similar sort of agricultural and industrial version of it. Interestingly, because experts seem to be critical of this idea, technical knowledge isn't valued. They're not asking the opinion of engineers whether this is actually achievable. They're not interested in the voices of scientists, and those voices are silenced. Think about the anti-rights campaign where people are asked their opinion during the 100 Flowers, and then they are hunted down and treated as traitors in the anti-rights campaign. There's a silence that greets the Great Leap Forward largely. So what's the outcome? What's it actually look like on the ground? Well, one thing that's really obvious is there's building of backyard steel furnaces in every commune and every neighbourhood. And when I say backyard, we can actually see photographs of these poorly built clay brick furnaces which are smelting down iron, any type of iron, in the hope of making steel. Now, this isn't something you can do with scientific knowledge. I don't know if you could even hope to make high quality steel without any scientific knowledge. I certainly couldn't. These backyard steel furnaces are springing up and being used by untrained people. They're throwing every bit of metal they can into the furnace. They're putting in their plows, their picks, they're putting in their shovels, their hoes, they're putting in wagon wheels, they're putting in frying pans and cooking pots. Everything in the hope of increasing steel production. What do they get out of it? Basically a thing called pig iron. Pig iron, it's scrap metal. It's not high enough quality to use in any meaningful way that the Communist Party was hoping for. In this process, they also need to increase irrigation to increase the production of agricultural goods, grain. So massive irrigation projects are built, massive dams are built, massive watercourses are rerouted around China. And the insanity of this is all happening again without the help of engineers. I don't want any dam built near me that isn't checked by an engineer. And you can imagine how this turns out. As all of this is going on, we have the destruction of private ownership at all levels. And we have the destruction, by the way, of private property. If your home seems to be in the road of a dam or a road that's needed, well, it's just gone. But certainly destruction of all private ownership at every level. Okay, this is then mismanaged. So people who might have been managing to run their household reasonably well in a rural area, they lose that. It's handed over to a poorly run commune instead. And it's in these areas that we have widespread food shortages breaking out. Any food that is being produced is being shipped to the cities, and the farmers themselves are going without. So, zipping down that second orange box there, there's building without the input of scientists and engineers. They don't have the knowledge to do what they're doing. They're producing poor quality goods, and shortages are starting to occur. We have environmental damage going on. To keep the furnaces going, whole forests are cut down. Anywhere that there are trees nearby a urban area, it's torn down and used as fuel for the fires. We have failing dams. We've got dam walls collapsing and whole communities being destroyed, and still no water then that goes into the new fields. We've got increasing human rights abuses as people speak out. They're not working hard enough. The cadres increase the punishments, often beating with rods and sticks and canes. Huge amounts of beatings and human rights abuses going on. Those people who are detecting the errors are actually shutting up and staying silent. Even Mao is aware that the campaign is a failure. He goes and visits steel production areas created by the Soviet Union in Manchuria, sees that he needs high quality coking coal to make high quality steel, and he keeps his mouth shut because he feels that if he corrects the campaign, it will dampen the revolutionary enthusiasm of the peasants. So, out of this whole process comes the Great Famine of 1959-61. The transformation of farming practice takes place with coercion, and it's a massive failure. Part of what then happens is, to avoid punishment, is you tend to exaggerate how much you can produce, and underreport the problems you're having so you can avoid punishment. So the government is operating on false information. And there are campaigns taking place, as we've seen in previous videos, campaigns to stop this false economic information going on. So it's this whole cycle of false information, bad decisions, no one correcting it, people covering up, then violence being used. Now, let's add into that just some of the more ludicrous scientific decisions. Again, I'm not a biologist. I'm not an expert in agriculture by any means. But one of the ideas that was used was to increase agricultural output, we'll just decrease the distance between all of the seeds that are being planted. So let's put all our crops closer together. All this means is the plants compete with each other for light, for moisture, and large numbers of the seedlings die in the ground. You actually get a decrease in production if you plant plants too close together. Deep ploughing is done. The argument is that if you're planting plants into too shallow a soil, they're not getting the nutrients. The nutrients in the soil are all being used up at the top. We've got to access down to the bottom. So we'll deeply plough. What's happening then is the fertile topsoil is being mixed in with the poor quality bedrock underneath in many areas. And all that's happening is you're getting the fertile topsoil that the plants need being replaced by a rocky sort of mix that does no good to any plant, and they die because there's not enough fertility in the soil. You've actually depleted the quality of your soil rather than improving the quality of the soil. There's the very famous 4 pests campaign. 4 pests are said to be lowering production: rats, mosquitoes, flies, and sparrows. And we'll talk about the sparrows because it's one of the most famous campaigns, and I'm short of time. Basically, we have all across China a major campaign to stop sparrows going anywhere near the seeds on the ground. Sparrows are being shot, scared away. We've got scenes of people out there banging lids of saucepans together and so on, waving flags all day just to chase away sparrows. Certainly, with the amount of shooting, with the starvation of sparrows that's been achieved, you do have less sparrows. Now we start getting into our whole web of interconnection of our ecology, and there is then, as a result, a huge locust plague. The sparrows are not eating all of the bugs, all of the insects that are damaging the crops, and the crops are destroyed because the bugs have no natural predators there. All of this is pretty obvious of what's going wrong in the complete nightmare that is the Great Leap Forward, and I've heard some historians joke about it, call it the Great Leap Backwards. How does the Chinese Communist Party deal with it? Well, they say actually until very recently there were 3 very, very bad weather seasons, and there were a few errors along the way, probably in the leadership of Mao. So the outcomes: massive decline in agricultural output. There is a failure to achieve in any industrial goods goals are after, and a policy is abandoned in 1962. The famine cost about 36 million lives. The Great Leap Forward has been held responsible for about 2 to 3 million violent deaths. Very hard to track how many other deaths, and they're sort of extrapolating across different provinces. An important one for us to be aware of is there's a decline in Mao's prestige within the Chinese Communist Party. After the failure of the 100 Flowers campaign and after a failure of the Great Leap Forward, these projects are laid at his feet as his responsibility, and suddenly Mao Zedong thought is not quite as attractive anymore. It's almost like the bubble on the legend has been burst. Let's now have one last glance at some imagery here. On this image here in the corner, you can see a propaganda poster from the time, and it is for the 4 Pests campaign. You get a sense of what that's about. Pointing with my mouse, we can see how many sparrows must have been killed. Here are all the children gathering around the wagon coming past all the sparrows, and our adults bringing in basically a wagon load of dead sparrows. Next to it, this is what I mean by backyard furnaces. When we're talking about backyard furnaces, and you can see 2 photographs here, I'm not really saying that they're literally in someone's backyard. What we're talking about is home built, knocked up as if you were putting it together like almost like some sort of shabby cubby house in your backyard. These are the backyard furnaces. You can, I can just look at that, no engineer, of course, but looking at that going, I can't see high quality steel being produced in this environment. Looking at a couple others in the bottom corner, I've got an image here of the huge amount of human labour being used to build dams for irrigation systems. It's almost slave labour type approach now. There's no wages being earned. Everyone's doing it within revolutionary enthusiasm. And this larger image here is where a dam has just been blown away. It's been washed away in a storm, and the dam that was being built without engineering support, of course, is just useless and destroyed. A waste of effort, a waste of human life, a waste of property, and all the crops that were meant to be fed with the water off that dam will now die. The last two photographs I've got here are images from the famine, the Great Famine. This image here is of communal living, where the commune, it's again a propaganda photo, where people are all gathered to eat as a commune, as one, coming together as almost like it's a military eating barracks. But other images are coming out, not as many as the propaganda images of the famine itself and the effects of starvation on children. All of that now juxtapositioned against an artwork such as this one from ChinesePosters.net, a propaganda artwork of the successes of the Great Leap Forward. We've got rockets being fired, we've got tractors, we've got well-fed people, a massive success. And I'll let you do some of that analysis as you move further into the assignment.